Now, earlier I spoke to the Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor just before he went into his own budget lock-up briefing. I started by asking him what he has assessed of the budget so far.
Well, a budget is a test of a new government's intentions, and this is the first real test for Labor. And I think the heart of the test is, will they consolidate the strong economy and strong budget position they've inherited and deal with the real pressures Australians are facing in the short term, very strong cost of living pressures, of course. And we need a responsible budget to deal with that, and in the longer term making sure that Australians can make ends meet with lower taxes. So they're the tests as we see it. Now, so far you'd have to say that Labor is putting up the white flag on all of those tests as well as their election commitments. You know, they promised higher real wages. We can see in their forecasts already that they're going to deliver no material increase in real wages in this election cycle.
Can they be blamed for that on wages?
Well, you know, the hard part of government is taking responsibility for the circumstances that you face. And this is the point. The test is, do you have a clear and a comprehensive plan to deal with those circumstances that you delivered, as we did during COVID? They were tough circumstances, but you have to deal with them.
Dealing with them in the future is one thing, but it's not like it's Labor's... they don't have to take responsibility for high inflation. I mean, they inherited high inflation.
Well, they have to take responsibility for a plan to deal with it. That's the point, Tom. And what we want to see is a clear and comprehensive plan. So far, we've seen a lot of forecasting, a lot of commentary, a lot of doom and gloom, well short of a plan that's going to deal with it and address the household budgetary issues, not just the government's budgetary issues that really count.
A few angles there. Let's cover them off by one. The fiscal position. Improvements in revenue, they inherited these as well. Low unemployment, resources as well. Labor is making sure there's a better budget bottom line overall over the 4-year period. So they're not just taking all that money and spending it. Is that a responsible approach?
Well, but hang on. So they inherited a budget which was $50 billion better than expected, a $32 billion deficit, which was amongst the lowest deficits in the Western world. It's going to be higher this financial year, and it's going to continue to get higher in the next couple of years. So that's what they've already told us. Now, we'll see more tonight.
Well, the reasons behind that are important, though. So it's increased, well, let's go through them. Yeah. Increased spending in health, aged care, defence, NDIS, the NBN. Is there anything they should be carving out, not going ahead with that?
Well, at the end of the day, managing spending is a process. It's not just, it's a lot of different things. And you need a process where you say, we want to have economic growth stronger than spending growth, and we're going to manage around that. That means encouraging economic growth. That's why tax cuts are so important at the right time, and they're coming in at the right time. And at the same time, you're containing spending with managing the program, not slash and burn. You don't need to. You just need to make sure the growth is slower than the economy. Right. Now, if you've got expanding budget deficits, just to finish, Tom, if you've got expanding budget deficits, which they do, we've already seen that this morning, if those reports are right, then you're not doing that. And this is where government gets hard. You've got to make tough decisions. I mean, things like the outer suburban rail loop in Melbourne, $2.2 billion a few weeks before a Victorian election. That's the sort of initiative that a process that I'm describing would really look at very hard.
But while they've inherited the fiscal improvements, they've also inherited the NDIS blowout, for example. That's not Labor's fault. That's the way the program was headed. Should they not have gone ahead with that extra funding?
As I say, it's the aggregate measures you've got to look at.
I know, but it's also, you mentioned decisions. It's about decisions. So the NDIS is a blowout they inherited.
Yeah, we're not in government. We don't sit in the ERC room where you're going through everything and you're making sure that those macro level measures are being met. Now, we did that in government between 2013, it's not theoretical, between 2013 and 2019, we contained spending growth to be less than economic growth. And that meant we took the $50 billion deficit we'd inherited from Labor in that first budget and we reduced it. And it was tough. It was there were things we couldn't get through the Senate, so we had to make changes. There's all sorts of work you have to do. Right. But that's the work of government.
But are you willing to say any of those areas they should have gone harder in?
Again, I'm not sitting in ERC. I mean, we obviously wish we were, but we lost the election. And that is... It's really then for Labor to make those calls. We've made a number of suggestions about areas where we think they're talking about irresponsible spending. I just mentioned one of them. But this is the hard work of government. But what we know already, and we'll see more in the budget tonight. I can't comment until I've seen details in the budget tonight, of course.
Well, that's fair enough. But what about, so what about just broadly health? another increase in how much? Only a few months ago it was going to be, I think, 537. It's now 548 billion over 4 years. Is that sustainable, that health budget?
Yeah. I know you're really wanting me to do the budget for Labor.
It's just specifics, I guess, but I'm just asking.
Well, I've given you a few specifics.
But structurally, I mean, that's when the rubber hits the road.
Right, and structurally we had spending pressures between 2013 and 2019. As I say, historical performance is the best indicator of future performance, and we did this, and we did it in a tough environment with spending pressures. I know what it takes to do it. I know it takes enormous discipline, hard work, looking through everything, looking for every angle to make sure that money, that taxpayers, hard-earned taxpayer money is being managed carefully. That's what needs to happen. Now, if we take a step back from it, if we don't have a responsible budget, and the early indications of what we're going to see on the deficits have been reported this morning, that puts more pressure on household budgets.
I'll get to that in a moment. Let me ask you finally, within the fiscal parameters, 23.9% tax to GDP rate, the so-called speed limit, is that still the guiding star for the coalition?
It is, and we've said that. I mean, and the important point here is that we want to see the stage 3 tax cuts.
Why is it? That's a very specific number that's been in place for a lot of years. Wouldn't you review it? Wouldn't you say, is that still the best fit for the Australian economy? I mean, is it just going to stay in place for 100 years? When do you say?
No, I mean, I'm not saying what's going to be in place in 100 years' time, Tom. I won't be around. But what I am saying is that we do need to make sure that government is managing taxpayers' money. It's not their money, it's taxpayers' money. We do want to see the vast majority of Australians on a broad sweep of income brackets paying no more than 30 cents in the dollar tax. That means they take home 70 cents. They can live with complete confidence that if they build their careers, build their businesses, they're taking home 70 cents in the dollar. And that gives enormous incentive to invest, to build careers, to take risks. They're the things we want to see, and that's why the stage 3 tax cuts are so important.
And that number sort of looks after itself with the stage 3 tax cut. So what about a spending to GDP cap? Is that the more relevant number?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you want to have you want to have a balanced budget. You want to be moving towards a balanced budget.
But do you need that cap to drive discipline on that? Is that not just as important a number as spending to GDP cap?
Well, if you are making sure that the economy is growing faster than you're spending, you will get to that outcome. That's the point. And that's the metric I talked about a moment ago. It was the metric we used when we were in government.
But you've got the specific one on the tax to GDP. Why not spending?
Well, it's effectively you're ending up with a balanced budget. I mean, you're going to bring spending within that envelope.
We still never hit that balanced budget.
Well, you know, we did get to a balanced budget in 2019. We had to work hard.
Didn't actually get there.
Well, but you understand, it was in balance.
It looked like it was heading there pre-bushfires, pre-COVID. Well, never actually.
We can quibble over the last billion if you like, but at the end of the day, we went from a $50 billion deficit to a point where the budget was in balance. That was an enormous amount of hard work. Labor in government will need to do the same hard work. That's the nature of government. Okay. It's not set and forget.
Are you calling for immediate cost of living relief in tonight's budget that should take effect straight away?
What we're calling for is a responsible budget that deals with the source, not just the symptoms. And this is important. You've got to deal with the source of the cost of living pressures, and that means a responsible budget.
Well, that means inflation.
Well,
right?
If you have
that's the source.
Well, hang on. But if you have a responsible budget, you take pressure off the Reserve Bank to raise interest rates. You take pressure off inflationary pressures that are out there in the economy. And any economist will tell you that's a sensible way to go forward. So what we're asking for is a responsible budget. There's other things that can be done to relieve inflationary pressures right at the source, making sure that as many Australians as possible are in work. So that's why we've put forward a policy for pensioners.
Right.
To give pensioners an incentive to work.
But someone out there already who's in work, who's raising a family or might be a part of a couple, doesn't matter, individuals as well, they also count, it's not just families. Are you saying there should be cost of living measures for them in the budget?
What I'm saying, we'll see what Labor
But I'm
puts
just,
forward.
You say we need, I've heard of this talk about cost of living pressure and it's out there. Yeah. But can that be addressed in tonight's budget, or would that just add to inflation?
The most important thing is to deal with the source of the inflationary pressures, and that's aggregate demand in the economy and aggregate supply. So
meaning we can't add to demand by giving money to households?
You've got to make sure... Look, it's not as though some direct support doesn't make sense. I mean, directly supporting pensioners to go into work is a kind of cost of living pressure that you're relieving. They're a vulnerable group. If they can do a bit more work, they're going to get more income.
Right. But handouts to families and individuals right now, as much as they'd love it, that would add to the fire. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is it's most important to deal with the source. If you're going to give targeted support to groups, look for those areas where you can help to relieve cost of living pressures. So where you get the double dividend, you're supporting a group who is suffering from cost of living pressures, and that's true for pensioners. And at the same time, you're getting an economic dividend of adding supply, which puts downward pressure on inflation. So you can have your cake and eat it with the right things.
Not many policies though, right? I mean, if you're going to hand out money to a family for electricity bills right now, that just adds to inflation.
Well, you know, when it comes to electricity, Labor committed to a $275 reduction. They said they were going to put policies in place that would deliver that. That's clearly not happening.
But just the example I gave wouldn't work. Is that fair to say? I know you keep talking about the source.
You're speculating. I can't comment on a specific initiative without.
But a handout.
Detail.
If you give a handout to a family right now, that would be a great popular thing to do, I'm sure. But it would add to inflation. Is that fair to say?
Let's see what's in the budget. I'll comment on specific initiatives when we've got details.
All right.
Speculating now doesn't make sense. I've made very clear what I think the principles are, Tom, and that's the key point.
We will talk again once we both know what's in that budget. Angus Taylor, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tom.